UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been moved into intensive care after his health worsened on Monday. The Prime Minister has asked Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab to deputise for him for the time being. 833 deaths in France, a new record high as COVID-19 continues its spree. French authorities warn that the fight is far from over after Monday's toll reverses encouraging data from the previous days. And in Austria, the government planned to relax coronavirus restrictions starting next week. Chancellor Sebastian Kurz says he hopes that small shops and businesses will be able to reopen. Hello and welcome to the France 24 newsroom. I'm Simon Harding. We start with news from the United Kingdom, where British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been moved to an intensive care unit in St Thomas's Hospital after his health worsened. Boris Johnson has been in hospital for 24 hours after his COVID-19 symptoms worsened over the weekend. For now, he remains the only head of government to have tested positive for the virus. The PM has asked Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab to deputise for him in his absence and where possible. Jean-Emile Jamin has the latest.
This is the London hospital where the British Prime Minister has been held since Sunday evening. Boris Johnson had been self-isolating in Downing Street after testing positive for the coronavirus last month. On the advice of his doctor, he was taken in for tests and kept for observation. But on Monday evening, Downing Street announced that Johnson's symptoms had worsened and that he would have to be moved into intensive care. The statement continued, saying the Prime Minister was receiving excellent treatment, thanking NHS staff for their hard work and dedication. When the Prime Minister first arrived at St Thomas Hospital, his symptoms are said to have included a high temperature and a cough. While his condition is since said to have deteriorated, his office have said that Johnson is conscious and doesn't require ventilation at the moment, adding that his move to intensive care has been done as a precautionary measure. British Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab, first in line to deputise for the Prime Minister, moved to dispel fears about the health of the 55-year-old, as well as dismissing any changes this could have on the way forward for government.
Well, the government's business will continue, and the Prime Minister is in safe hands with a brilliant team at St Thomas's Hospital, and the focus of the government will continue to be on making sure, at the Prime Minister's direction, all the plans for making sure that we can defeat coronavirus and pull the country through this challenge will be taken forward.
While there are hundreds of thousands of cases of coronavirus worldwide, Boris Johnson is one of the first known heads of state to have the illness.
Here in France, the daily COVID-19 deaths has risen to a record high with 833 new fatalities reported by the government. France has been in a state of lockdown for the past 21 days, and Health Minister Olivier Véran has said that the fight against the virus is far from over. Erin Agunki has this report.
After 3 weeks of confinement, new numbers in France suggest the measures are working, the curve finally starting to flatten. And while the number of patients admitted to intensive care increased over the past 24 hours, taking the number of patients who have left intensive care units into account, a net total of just 94 remain. It's the lowest figure since the lockdown began, alleviating pressure on French hospitals.
On reprend un peu notre souffle. C'est-à-dire qu'on n'est pas en permanence en train de créer des lits, de faire la chasse, de placer des patients. On arrive à admettre tous les patients un petit peu plus facilement. C'est juste un ralentissement du nombre d'entrées. C'est-à-dire, ce qu'il faut bien garder en tête, c'est qu'il n'y a jamais eu autant de patients en réanimation en France de l'histoire de la réanimation.
But the situation remains critical, with healthcare workers calling for caution. Though the worst-hit regions of Île-de-France and the Greater East are starting to see signs of hope, the outbreak could still worsen elsewhere.
Ce n'est pas fini, loin de là. On a peut-être atteint un summum en région parisienne, on ne l'a pas atteint dans d'autres régions de France. Donc les autres régions de France vont être touchées. Et donc on reste avec un mois d'avril qui va être extrêmement difficile.
Taking that reality into account, the French health minister has warned against letting up on the confinement measures.
Ce n'est pas terminé, loin de là. Nous ne sommes pas au bout de l'ascension épidémique. Le chemin reste long et rien n'est fini. Les chiffres que je vous ai présentés il y a quelques minutes le démontrent.
In other countries, seemingly reassuring numbers hit a second wave of infections, a situation France hopes to avoid at all costs.
Time for our daily business update with a specific look at France this Monday, which is heading for its worst recession since the Second World War as the country remains in lockdown to limit the spread of the coronavirus. The finance ministry warned the economy could shrink even more than the negative 2.9% recorded in 2009. Our business editor Kate Moody reports on the latest predictions from Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire and what measures the Eurozone is taking to relaunch economic activity.
When the lockdown was first announced, Bruno Le Maire predicted the French economy would shrink 1% in 2020. It's now clear the economic damage will be far worse. The National Statistics Agency says that for every month of lockdown, 3 percentage points will be shaved off annual GDP growth. That means a 2-month shutdown could see negative growth of 5 to 6% for the year. French industry is operating at only around a quarter of its normal capacity, and 5 million people have applied for temporary unemployment benefits from the government. That's an emergency fund that was initially due to be worth 8.5 billion euros. Bruno Le Maire says it's already been boosted to 11 billion. Most economists do predict a fairly quick rebound in the second half of the year if the lockdown strategy and monetary and fiscal support measures prove to be effective. To that end, the Eurozone finance ministers will be holding a teleconference on Tuesday to discuss mobilizing up to €500 billion to help kickstart the Eurozone economy. We're not expecting any agreement on the divisive issue of so-called corona bonds or joint debt, which has really divided Eurozone member states. They could agree to mobilize the bailout fund known as the European Stability Mechanism and facilitate lending. Member states looking to insulate their economies from the immediate shock as well as lay the groundwork for a quick recovery.
Austrian Chancellor Sebastian Kurz says he plans to phase out COVID-19 restrictions. Austria has seen a drop in deaths and cases and is now looking to slowly get back to normal life, allowing shops shuttered because of the pandemic to reopen in just over a week. Our correspondent in Vienna, Anthony Mills, analyses the government's move for us.
What the Chancellor has said is that if we see a continuation over the next week of the current trend, which is bringing down that expansion in daily increases to what he sees as being a manageable level, and if the Austrians and the people living here remain, in his words, disciplined, then in a week, next Wednesday, in fact, or Tuesday, then some measures will be lifted. And the reason he says is that Austria acted fast early. He says Austria was one of the first European countries to impose a very restrictive clampdown with only serious reasons among those that were necessary for people to leave their houses. And he said that that has paid off. It has brought that expansion rate down in terms of new infections. It's kept intensive care cases down. And he says that's why they are going to be able to lift some of those restrictions. But it's far from a return to normal, of course. This is a staggered return, only small shops opening.
The death toll in the United States has surpassed 10,000 people, whilst New York State and City remain the epicenters of the crisis. With over 350,000 confirmed cases, the US is the most infected country in the world. But there are early signs that the states of New York and New Jersey were seeing their curves flattening, though authorities have warned their citizens against any form of complacency. 90% of all Americans are currently being told to stay at home. France 24's Jessica Lemazure in New York tells us a little bit more about what could happen there.
Mass graves in a New York City park. That could become a reality. A New York City councilman spoke about the contingency plan on Monday, saying that it was being considered and that if the hospital and city morgues end up overflowing, it will be the plan that is put into place to deal with all of the dead bodies. With all respect, he said, 10 caskets will be put into mass graves in a public park in New York City. He did not specify which one. plan. Bill de Blasio, the New York mayor, said that the city will only put this plan into place if it is necessary. It comes from a pandemic plan drawn up in 2008. Governor Cuomo, on the other hand, in his daily press briefing, said that he had not heard of this plan to put dead bodies in a public park in New York City. He struck, you might say, hopeful tone, saying that the death rate now here in New York has been flat for 2 days running. The hope is that we've reached a plateau here and that social distancing is working, he said. He extended his pause order for schools and non-essential businesses to be shut right up until April 29th.
Staying in the United States, Wisconsin's Supreme Court have overruled Governor Tony Evers's postponing of the primary elections, and the state will therefore head to the urns as planned. Wisconsin's governor had cited public health concerns related to the coronavirus, issuing a last-minute executive order to reschedule the vote. However, the Republican Party took the matter to court. Evers, who is a Democrat, had until now refrained from postponing the elections. The matter, however, is far from being concluded. More court challenges are expected. Tokyo and 6 other prefectures will enter a state of emergency after a major spike of COVID-19 cases in Japan. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe confirmed that a $1 trillion stimulus package will be made available to shield the Japanese economy from the crisis. However, the government said they will not impose a nationwide lockdown.
After resisting for weeks, Monday saw mounting pressure finally force the hand of Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe.
明日にも緊急事態宣言を発出したいと考えています。
Exceptional measures passed last month in Parliament allowed Japan's authorities to deploy restrictive measures like these in their bid to fight the spread of the coronavirus.
1ヶ月程度の期間を目安として感染につながる人と人との接触を極力減らすため、国民の皆様にはこれまで以上のご協力をいただくこと。
Out of 47 regions in the country, only 7 will be affected. Governors will be given authority to call on people to stay at home, and non-essential businesses will be asked to close. But confinement and sanctions are off the table, with no penalties for ignoring requests. Enforcement will rely more on peer pressure and respect for authority. According to a survey conducted on Monday by broadcaster TBS, 80% of Japanese are ready to comply with these measures.
今大変なのですごいいい案だなとはもともと思ってます。でもなんか経済とかが本当に回っていくのかなっていうのは正直ちょっと心配だなっていうふうに思います。
To support the world's third largest economy, Prime Minister Abe has announced a massive stimulus package of 915 billion euros, or 20% of Japan's GDP, an unprecedented move in the history of the country. But while the aid has far exceeded analysts' expectations, Japan is soon projected to enter into a brutal recession.
And with lockdown measures in place across many countries in the world, cases of domestic abuse have been rising sharply, with calls to certain helplines doubling and even tripling in some nations. The United Nations have weighed in on the argument, calling for peace at home.
They're normally considered safe spaces, but as more and more people around the world are told to stay at home, the United Nations chief warned that for some, the threat looms largest there.
We know lockdowns and quarantines are essential to suppressing COVID-19, but they can trap women with abusive partners. Over the past weeks, as economic and social pressures and fear have grown, we have seen a horrifying global surge in domestic violence.
His warning follows reports from around the world that the situation has worsened since lockdowns were introduced. One domestic abuse helpline in the UK has seen a 25% increase in calls and online requests for help. The Australian government said Google had registered a 75% rise in searches for domestic violence. And in France, police intervention for cases of domestic violence in Paris has increased by more than a third. These figures may just be the tip of the iceberg, with victims finding it harder to raise the alarm during lockdown without alerting their abusers. Spain and France are now telling women to seek help at pharmacies if possible, using a code word.
So that if the woman goes somewhere for shopping, she can tell the situation, she can raise the alarm. It's very important that the witness or the pharmacist or anybody in contact with them are really aware of the fact that they have a big responsibility because this woman might not have another chance.
The UN is urging governments not to abandon victims as they focus on fighting coronavirus. Some countries have already made extra funds available. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, for instance, announcing more than €26 million for women's shelters.
And that's all the news we have for now. Thank you very much for watching. From everyone here at France 24, stay safe. Do take care. Bye-bye.